Welcome to the Cannacurio podcast powered by Cannabis Media. I'm your host, Ed Keating. Today, we're joined by Lisa Buffo, CEO of the Cannabis Marketing Association. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Ed, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. So, as I've sometimes read up on these podcasts, I spent a good part of my career working in an association. So I appreciate how they work and all the challenges they have. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And the first place I wanted to start really is tell us about your background and how did you decide to create the CMA? I mean, that is not for the faint of heart to go out and create a whole association.
Yes, that is correct. My background is in marketing. So I studied psychology and English undergrad. And I've always had an interest in business and entrepreneurship, but really thought learning psych and English was going to help me with, whatever my next steps ended up being after college. And I sort of fell into marketing, which kind of will lead you to how we got here. But one of my first jobs out of college, and I graduated right when Instagram was becoming a thing, social media and viral social media marketing was just becoming realized as a really potent force in marketing.
Yep.
I actually worked for a startup nonprofit that was working with service dogs. And part of my job was to be the educational side on the internet. So I was taking pictures of the dogs and posting them on social media and educating people about what that organization was doing, which was training service dogs to be assistance dogs for veterans. And in that process, we started seeing our social media accounts gain a following really quickly. And that led to increased donations for the organization, increased engagement and signups for volunteers, increased education around the model that we were doing. It ended up like taking on a whole world of its own where we created a line of merch that we could sell that helps fund the organization. So I kind of fell into it in the sense of like young person, social media at the right time.
Yep.
But then doing it, I saw the power that social media had on a business and something that needed to bring in revenue or, donations for a nonprofit at the time. And it was really powerful. And I kind of got hooked on marketing then, particularly on the tech side and this like engineered virality if content and storytelling is done right, because it was so powerful in taking an organization that had just started and, we thought was going to take this amount of time and this way to fundraise and to kind of shortcut that growth through this platform was just, it was so powerful. So then I got my start in marketing like that.
Right.
And then over the next 10 years, I worked in various different roles in marketing for different organizations, both in the public sector and in private and nonprofits. And I ended up joining the cannabis industry. I can get into the story, but to just answer your question quickly, once I got into cannabis, I had a CMO role. So I had sort of worked my way up into different marketing roles. I had a CMO role for a cannabis tech startup. So it was an ancillary business helping to facilitate wholesale transactions online. And I had taken what I had learned in marketing in that space or in my prior roles into cannabis and realized that playbook did not work in this space at all.
Oh, interesting.
In theory, it would, right? You're like, oh, this is the content is amazing. And it's such an obvious story. And I started working in the industry in 2014. So right when adult use had started in Colorado, and it felt perfect. But then I started to apply that playbook and realize you can't talk about cannabis on social media. You don't have the same places where you can post content, take out ads because of the nature of its federal status. So I had started having meetings on the side and I'd say, hey, Ed, say you're the CMO of this dispensary. Can you talk about how you pulled off this campaign or what did you do when your Instagram account got shut down? Really to help teach myself and my peers at the time. And we called it Cannabis Marketing Association because it sounded professional but it was a very informal thing. And that was how we got started.
So for people who aren't familiar with how associations work, they often fall into two or maybe three camps. Some of them are professional associations for people, or they're sometimes trade associations for companies, and some are both. Where do you fit into that? Or where does your association fit into that in terms of who is going to be a member?
So both as far as membership. We do serve individuals and we do serve businesses. So we have two different membership tiers, literally individual and business. And that is the nature of where the industry stands. We have a lot of solopreneurs in the space. We do have a lot of businesses in the space, and we have a lot of solopreneurs that will scale up. And particularly on the marketing side, when it comes to marketing services, you can be a solo founder doing creating content, social media, whatnot. You could be an agency of any different size. So that was where that came from. But associations are also typically or can be lobbying organizations that actually represent a group of people in a government to, or like a lobbying capacity in order to change laws and do that. We do not do that. We are more focused on education and content and best practices from that educational side of the industry, as opposed to
Sure.
changing the laws. So
Yeah.
we had the name first, admittedly, and then kind of built the model around that. But we really focus on helping those who produce marketing content for cannabis businesses to put their best foot forward from a compliance standpoint, and also just marketing best practices in this space, which do follow that of other industries to some degree, but also there is a level of specificity in cannabis that I haven't quite seen anywhere else yet as well.
Sure. No, that's absolutely true. So with that in mind, in terms of, what the ethos is of the association, what kinds of people and titles, if you will, join or are attracted to that? Like you mentioned some of the solopreneurs who are wearing every hat in the building, but at larger organizations where there might be more role specialization, who makes up your membership roles in terms of titles?
Yeah, so it's marketers. So that can be the founder and the CEO who's doing marketing, for the organization. It can be kind of your typical marketing roles: VP marketing, VP brand, CMO, director of marketing, head of content. There's a lot of different roles within marketing, kind of depending on the size and specialty of the organization. We work with a lot of agencies as well. So those can be, the account reps, the account coordinators, those who act as outsourced or like air marketers that aren't in-house. But you also have a lot of on the license holder side. So cannabis businesses, there's a lot of brands and dispensaries who have small teams where they might have, and this was even the case when I was doing it. When I was the CMO, I was everything. I was the CMO, but I was the entire marketing team. And we've seen that it's very common where there will be one marketing person and they might be managing contractors or, working with agencies on behalf of that organization, but internally they are it. And they may have other jobs. We have marketers who are CMO and COO. They're CMO and they do various admin work, or they do different forms of operational roles. So because of the nature of the industry, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit, depending on the organization and how they're structured, just depends on who that point of contact is for marketing. But we really focus on those who are producing content for cannabis businesses. And we do focus on more of that senior level. So we're not really talking or creating content around like marketing 101. Our members are generally experienced, seasoned marketers to varying degrees, who are tasked with driving that top line or top funnel in the business.
That makes sense. And it's interesting the way you describe people really having multiple roles. On a recent podcast, we had the CEO of Cannabis Staffing, and they do hiring. And one of the themes that she touched on is how many companies now are doing fractional roles or temporary hires or gig, because that's, people buying sort of what they need instead of everything. And I think on the marketing side, that's probably true as well. Now, one question sort of ties the people and the membership companies together is, how are you guys split between, let's say, license holders or ancillary companies? Like, are they both welcome within the umbrella of the Cannabis Marketing Association?
Yes. And there's a lot of overlap between them too. We will have, if Ed was our member, you might be with this dispensary this year, and then the next year there's a change and you're with this agency, and then 2 years later you're with the brand, but you're all still within the ecosystem. So we really focus on our members as individuals and as champions, given how much change there can be within their own careers within cannabis, as well as folks who are coming in. We get a lot of folks who say, hey, I've spent 10 years in CPG, you're 10 years in, maybe more traditional tech, and then they get into cannabis, and CMA will be their first stop as far as learning about what is different in marketing in this space before they do what I did, which is build out this beautiful marketing plan that will not work in this industry, whether it's for regulatory constraints, budget reasons, or, all the other reasons where marketing doesn't, copy and paste over to this space that you kind of learn on the job. So answer is it really can depend, but we do serve both license holders, those who work in-house, and the service providers who service them, but they are ultimately doing the same job, which is creating content on behalf of a licensed business.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I've always found that it's good to have sort of that hybrid model where you get people from different parts of the industry, as you articulated, because there's a lot of learning and sharing, and that career path that people may amble on from left to right. It's helpful to have a place to go back to, or that's sort of a home base in a way where maybe they'll find their next job through a member, or,
yes,
they'll move through the marketing mix in a different way of being at the agency or ancillary company, or, at a license holder. So yeah, that cross-pollination always helps. We find at Cannabis Media that sometimes people may leave one of our customers, and then they'll go someplace else and become a customer because they hopefully had a good experience. Like, yeah, I need Cannabis Media to do my job. So I'm sure it's true of the CMA as well.
Very much so.
In terms of benefits, it's sort of a big picture question. What are some of the member benefits that people enjoy by being a part of the Cannabis Marketing Association?
Yeah, so our three big things are education, community, and best practices. So we lead with education because in order to be successful in this space, you have to understand the space that you're playing in. That comes from both the compliance perspective, but also understanding that each market, each vertical in this industry can have its nuance. And that's also changed over the years as the industry has matured, as more states and markets have come online, and as the regulations have matured a bit as far as understanding which ones are consistent, which ones might be a little different, depending on where you are and, how that evolves. So we lead with education. I will say there's sort of like a pre-pandemic CMA and a post-pandemic CMA. Pre-pandemic, we were doing a lot of in-person events in local locales. So we had 9 different cities that we were hosting events in. Obviously, the pandemic, we had to go all online for a few years. And we had built in that online component where all the content before the pandemic, all the content that we were creating ultimately would live in our member portal or an online library, which is very standard of associations and organizations like ours. So you can go back and reference it. But there's also that in-person component for the networking, the connecting, and the learning live. Yeah. So during the pandemic, we moved obviously completely online for some time. And then instead of doing as much of the smaller local events, we moved to doing a larger national conference. So we do have a conference in June in Denver called the Cannabis Marketing Summit, which was actually in the works in 2020. So we did it. We had to be online in 2020 and 2021. Oh, right. So we were those things panned out at the same time, which was a fun learning curve as all those in the event space had that year. But we were able to do it in person in 2022 and this year, of course. So we have the education component, which is webinars. We have a pretty extensive blog. We have a member Slack channel. So we'll do like Ask Me Anythings in there. And we do online networking, the community aspect. So that's our in-person events. And we do virtual events or like networking, connecting things as well. And then the best practices, which kind of falls in between both of that. Whenever we do content at our conferences or produce something online, whether it's a checklist or some research that we've done, it's in the effort of creating that North Star of saying, while we are sometimes I think in the industry, we love to think, oh, we're doing everything for the first time and this is all new. And like, it's like nothing else we've ever done before. And while some of that is true, there is also like, hey, this is what is a best practice in another industry or in marketing as a whole. And so we can get 80% of the way there and then take our 20% that we know of what is unique about cannabis. And that kind of leads us towards what we know is the best possible way to do this type of marketing campaign or initiative. And we've seen that pretty clearly with social media. There's a a lot of this space exists in the gray. And so you have to be comfortable working in cannabis in the gray, and cannabis marketing is no different. What can and can't you say that is marketing a product without selling it is very subjective in a lot of different ways. So we try to answer that question, that third component is best practices, and say, here's as like the most true north that we know exists, but we don't claim as CMA to know that. That comes from our members. So we ask our members to speak from experience, and we have standards from that and say, hey, Ed's been doing this a long time. Here's what he's learned. And we'll give Ed that platform and then, go from there. So really the core of our model is the community, and we see ourselves as responsive to them. We create content based on what they ask for, and we create with them leading to a degree. We kind of see ourselves more as the producers and the facilitators for that space, as opposed to we know best, because we don't. And every year it changes.
Yeah, no, I agree. When I used to plan conferences, it was always under the "we are smarter than me," and we would just get a great, let's say, steering committee, and you get great ideas, or they knew people that nobody else knew, and you get great speakers. So it sounds like you've got a great model there. One of the things that I'm really intrigued about, because a lot of associations do these, but it's hard to do them well, and it sounds like you have a neat model, is your awards program. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because you have some very specific criteria as to the kind of awards that you will bestow upon somebody who's an entrant into that program.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. So awards can be tricky, and I've been a submitter to awards. I've been a judge of awards in different spaces, marketing and otherwise. They can often be seen as a popularity contest, or like sometimes what I call big shiny object syndrome, where it's like, oh, that's the, that looks the best, or that's the, the latest, hottest thing. And we really wanted to create a program that was in line with our mission. And I would say this for all entrepreneurs and all organizations. When you start, as early as possible, write a mission statement, get very clear on that. That will help you manage your team, but it will also help you when you're leading a group, particularly like us, where we have members who have a million different ideas for what we could do, what we could do better, how we could serve them. You can't do it all. So you've got to pick and do those things well. So for us, our mission statement is to bring a positive perception to an authentic understanding of cannabis and its consumers around the world. And we basically are interested in that, changing the narrative around cannabis and positively rebranding it. But we say, as opposed to us doing that, if we help our members do their jobs better, they are the ones who are putting out the content that the public sees. They're the ones educating folks who walk into dispensaries about their products, about what cannabis does and what it is. So if we can help them better communicate more effectively, we will have that net change kind of from the background, if you will. So our awards criteria was effectiveness and efficiency, and then is it advancing the image of cannabis? So the efficiency part was saying to our entrants, make the case, but it's marketing, right? And we're still running businesses. You can have nice, pretty things, but if it's not ultimately driving your top of funnel or an organizational goal, you're spending money just to spend money. And that is what gives marketing either a bad rap, or when times get tough economically, marketing can be the first to go. So marketers also have to learn how to defend the work that they do and really speak to it. So the effectiveness part is saying, what was your goal and did you accomplish it? And how does that tie into your organization? And then the other part is, along with our mission, is it advancing the image of cannabis? And we really say that in the sense that the conversation up until this point has been about destigmatization, which is, in really simple terms, like cannabis isn't as bad as we've been told, but it doesn't end there. Like we are, no matter what, moving forward, 20, 40 years down the line, we are still going to be responsible about how we talk about it. What is that message and where is that coming from? So for us, we want to see content and campaigns that are advancing that image, not detracting from it. And there have been marketing campaigns in this space that are quite controversial. They may show, use, I would say, older school marketing techniques or imagery that is either not inclusive, can be, a little bit biased, or haven't been fully thought through.
Yeah.
We don't want those to we basically want to uplift those who are putting in the thought and who are doing the work
Sure.
and are being conscious about that. So that's where our award program is. It's not one or the other, and it's not necessarily who's the most expensive, but it can be, we've seen small businesses do really fantastic, impactful, powerful campaigns that have a good net for their business, but they may not cost millions of dollars and have, a celebrity in them. And those should be able to play on the same field as those that may have more resources or visible recognition. So that's
Sure.
where we try to come at it.
Got it. Now, one of the most important tools we have in the space, and I think part of it is because of the age of the industry, is there's a lot of data out there, and much of it is driven from the software platforms that maybe handle menus, texting, rewards, point of sale. I mean, there's a lot of those companies are our customers, so we're familiar with how they work. But I would imagine from a marketer standpoint, that could be a rich trove of information to really help guide those efforts and hit those efficiency and efficacy goals. Is that right?
Data is always a good thing to consider when you're running a business, when you're running a marketing campaign. I mean, the language of business is finance, and the language of marketing is also numbers, right? You are also talking about, how is this showing return? So you need to be able to speak to that. I will say in the early days of the industry, that data didn't exist. So there was several years, when I started in 2014, it was the first year of adult use. There was no, here's what our sales were last year. It was, here's our baseline. And then over time, we got to see what are the trends, how are things evolving. So it is important, I think, as an industry and as organizations and as professionals to incorporate data into our decision-making, particularly when so many businesses are either bootstrapped or they have much smaller financial resources to pull from to execute, given 280E and some of these other things, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that you have to make as informed of a decision as possible. So using data is a good thing. But what I like to say, and I have found to be true, is that good data in means good data out. So you need to make sure the resources you're using, whatever it is, whether it's internal or third party, that it is good data and you're reading it correctly and interpreting it correctly. And that takes time, particularly when it's a larger data set or something that may be new and is still kind of figuring out how clean it is or what the story is there. But data does tell a story. And as marketers, we want to be able to understand that story so we can make better and more informed decisions going forward.
Got it. Well, it sort of leads me into my next data question about cannabis media, because we started a little bit after you came into the industry in 2015. I'm curious if you or your team has had a chance to utilize cannabis media in your efforts to see sort of size, shape, and growth of the industry.
Yes, we have. We've used the email platform for our own conferences and our own events, and it has been really helpful. I mean, and we have found the data to be accurate as far as I can understand and tell. That you update, the licenses regularly, that the contact information is clean, and being able to understand and have that resource as opposed to going out and, spending the time to do it yourself saved our team time. And we did see return from it. So we used it from the email campaign side, but we were very happy.
Cool. Well, if the data's not good, you're talking to the guy who can get it straightened out. So
Yes.
that's good to hear. Now looking more broadly, I'm curious because the cannabis economy has been challenged. We've been in a bear market for about 2 years now. It seems even longer. So, what kind of challenges does that create for your association? What do you have to contend with, and or even just the regular challenges, not just economic ones? But I'm just sort of curious. What are the headwinds that you run into at this point?
The economic ones are a big one. And I will put this in context for, I'm guessing this might be a bit more informative an audience on this podcast, but for those who don't know, from the biggest thing in the marketing conversation to understand is 280E, which basically says that for licensed cannabis businesses, their marketing expenses cannot be written off. So you cannot deduct your marketing expenses when it comes to paying your tax bill at the end of the year. So therefore, marketing budgets are fractions of what they should be. And CMA has data on this. So outside of the cannabis industry, for the larger marketing organizations, the average marketing budget is around 9 to 10%. That dropped during the pandemic. It's starting to recover. In cannabis, it's like 1 or 2 tops of gross revenue.
Yep.
So when you're talking about budgets that small to execute on your campaigns, to join associations, to see return, you have to know where every single dollar is going, and you have to see it come back to you. So, when things get tight economically, as a whole, cannabis and other industries included, marketing can be one of the first functions that gets cut because it can be seen as something that would go first.
Yeah,
So
discretionary.
yes, which everyone's got opinions on that, because if you don't have top of funnel, sometimes you don't have bottom of funnel, but it does. So marketers do need to understand, again, like I was saying, how to be able to say, no, this isn't discretionary. We are a core function of a business, and we're able to show return directly tied to revenue. So from the industry perspective and CMA's perspective, we feel when things get tough economically, because even when things are good, they are small and they are lower compared to everybody else via 280E from a spending and budget perspective. But cannabis also has like what I sometimes say to our team is like a phantom tax, where anytime you're trying to like launch a campaign or work with a service provider or, add a technology, you tell them you're in cannabis, and sometimes, it's 30% more because you're high risk. And so
Yeah.
things like that also have economic impact because it is still the federal status of cannabis hasn't changed. And that's assuming you can work with all the vendors you would want because they're open in this space. I mean, we've seen payment processors kick people off. We've seen payroll companies, kick businesses off. We've seen
MasterCard.
like that was this year. It's 2023. We're, almost a decade into adult use legalization. Like, these have big impacts on business owners who are already dealing with, an uphill climb. So economic headwinds is a big one. Yes, I do think we have been in a bear market for quite some time. Don't know when and how things are going to change, hopefully sooner than later. But from my experience, almost 10 years in this industry, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It will probably continue to do that, but there is urgent need for reform at a federal level.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, looking at just at other trends, like on the technology side, are there any other trends that we should be looking out for, especially those that might be like impacting marketing specifically?
Biggest thing we're hearing about like almost every day is AI. Like
Huh.
GPT changed everything. There are AI plugins for everything. We have completely internally reevaluated our whole tech stack now with an
Wow.
AI lens. That it is a big deal. What would have normally taken, an employee or someone, X amount of hours to do something, that can be reduced with the right AI tools. And those tools can help you get data and information faster than and more efficiently than perhaps that was the case 2 or 3 years ago. Not to mention just pure content creation. I mean, writing emails, blog posts, researching keywords, like those things can happen way faster and cheaper now through AI tools than not. So it's still early, I think, for me to definitively say, here's
Mhm.
where things are heading or whatnot. But I think what I can say is ignoring AI is a big mistake, both from a marketing perspective and an organizational perspective. And we're going to continue to see it impact businesses in different ways.
Excellent point. Excellent point. All right. So the last bit of advice for you to give out to everybody is, what do you see as some effective marketing strategies for cannabis businesses? Because all the points you made about challenges economically, challenges sometimes vying for your budget within your company, tough times. So what advice do you give to people in terms of good strategies to help them?
First thing I will say is like, remember your customers are still living, breathing human beings. Like, you can hit them with all the fancy design you want and all the like creative copy you want. But if you aren't really treating them as emotional, sentient beings, like they can see right through that, and none of that stuff will work. You have to put the two in context to each other. And really build trust and community within them. We've seen businesses spend millions of dollars on fancy campaigns who don't treat their customers that way, and there's no amount of money that will make up for that. It just, community and that thoughtfulness really does still go a long way, all fancy tools aside. The other thing I will say is the tried and true method of inbound marketing does work and does take time. And that involves creating content that your customers are searching for and helping answer their questions. Cannabis still has a big educational component. And even and again, we'll continue to. And as it gets more competitive, you are going to need to tell consumers why your brand is better than the others, or what makes it unique and what makes it stand out, and why should they continue to purchase from you. And so to continually create content and be thoughtful about your messaging, again, paired with that, remember, these are still humans on the other side of the screen or package or, point of sale, I think is ultimately like, remember that as the North Star, and then the tools and the process and strategy all will assist with that, but to not forget like what marketing is at the end of the day. And it's just thoughtful communication from an organization to its customers or prospective customers.
Excellent point and good advice. And the thing that we often remind ourselves too is that despite all the challenges the industry is going through, it's still a gigantic market that's still growing. I mean, it's tens of billions of dollars, and it's continuing to grow every day, every month, every quarter. So, hopefully we can get through the economic challenges, including the 280E, perhaps descheduling, and a lot of other things are getting in the way. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot, and it's great to hear there's an organization that can serve as kind of that North Star and just a great place for like minds to be, who want to learn more about the best and most effective ways to market into the cannabis industry.
I appreciate it, Ed. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us on today's podcast. I'm your host, Ed Keating, and stay tuned for more updates from the Data Vault.